You walk into this room at your own risk, because it leads to the future. Not a future that will be, but one that might be. This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time. It has refinements, technological advances, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of freedom. But like every one of the superstates that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace.
Hello, fellow creature. Welcome back to Rooftop Talks. I considered in this video making a comprehensive, a lengthy video about the parallels between the human Holocaust, the Holocaust of Nazi Germany, World War II, and the animal Holocaust, which is ongoing. I wanted to build a really thorough case for it because I am a student of history, and that is where I get a lot of my inspiration. I get a lot of my insights into the animal Holocaust from the Nazi Holocaust. But I think it would be better actually if I just provide a few insights in this video that I learned that really opened up my eyes to this. First of all, I just want to fortify this position a little bit. If you take offense to me applying the word Holocaust, if you say the Holocaust, that's fine. We all understand what you mean by that. You will be talking about the Nazi Holocaust. Also, I just want to note that the Holocaust should not be reserved for the Jewish community, because I think that does a massive disservice to the many Polish resistance fighters, the disabled, the Catholics, the variety of non-Jewish victims to the Nazi Holocaust. And there is nothing in the definition of the word Holocaust that means that it has to be exclusive to the human species. There is a reason why I feel I can and should talk about this, and that is from the phrase, never again. These powerful two words that emerged from that atrocity, never again. I take that imperative seriously. We must learn from history. If we are to learn from this, we have to make this word accessible and we have to be able to discuss it with free speech. I'm sure you learned about the Holocaust in history class. I'm sure you can call upon many facts about the Holocaust. One that I learned recently from a documentary that I found very interesting was not actually about the event itself, but about what happened to Germany in the wake of losing the war. It took decades for the German people to come to terms with what happened. Despite all of the information being documented, despite the Allies coming in and liberating the remaining survivors of the Holocaust, and those survivors having testimonies, and then finding the canisters of Zyklon B, and the Nuremberg trials, despite the overwhelming evidence, the number of Germans who, when polled, confirmed that the Holocaust had happened in the way that was reported was very low.
While the public reaction to the trials was initially good, that actually changed over time. Gradually, people began to view them as less legitimate. They viewed them as victors' justice and an imposition of collective guilt, which they rejected. 4 years after the trials, support for them had fallen to 38%, with 30% of the population viewing them as unfair. In other surveys, attitudes continued to be defiant. In 1951, just 5% of West Germans said that they felt guilt towards the Jews. 1 in 5 Germans actually believed that the Jews were partially responsible for what had happened to them. That said, 29% did believe that Germany should give compensation to the victims of the Holocaust. That actually happened. In 1953, West Germany agreed to pay reparations. However, only people who were directly victimized were eligible, not children or grandchildren. Given that many Germans were still not sympathetic to the Jews, you won't be surprised to learn that the reparations were politically controversial and many politicians voted against it. For the victims themselves, getting the money was extremely difficult. They often had a bitter fight on their hands that could last for decades. Many didn't get back the houses and businesses that had been confiscated from them by the Nazis. I think that shows how, for all the denazification efforts, attitudes were slow in changing. I mean, we're talking about Jews who, for example, owned a house only 2 decades earlier, had it confiscated by the Nazis, and now was still unable to get it back. For the next few years, public opinion stayed fairly constant in Germany, a mixture of defiance and denial.
It took an extraordinary effort by the media, by the government, to educate the people who were there, to get them to come to terms with the fact that this did actually happen. And in fact, the word Holocaust was only popularized by a television series that I believe came out in like the 70s or 80s. So there was this TV series called The Holocaust, which kind of dramatized the whole thing and created stories around it, and it was on television and lots of people saw it. And that made real headway in the German acceptance, the acceptance of what had happened. And I find this interesting because it can take a long time for a society to accept something they've done wrong. It takes a lot of effort. And so society has this difficulty, this kind of inertia with what they believe and how they behave. And we can also see this on a personal level, this behavioral inertia, this inertia of one's beliefs. All of the cogs in your brain are turning a certain way, and if one cog turns the opposite way, the other cogs will force it to turn the way the others are turning, if that makes sense. Through conversations with non-vegans, we often get to this point where the non-vegan will, before long, just admit, yeah, I know it's messed up. I know it's messed up what I'm doing, but it's what I've always done. And then it follows, another excuse follows. And there's no real easy hack, because I've been looking all this time for just the perfect combination of words. And unfortunately, there isn't a combination. It takes listening, figuring out how this person works who's standing in front of you, and it requires a relentless effort of campaigning, of public awareness campaigns, of information, of persuasive speech and rhetoric, of history lessons, of comparisons, discussion, just like those government information programs that came out after the war. This particular fact about the Holocaust really seems to resemble the problem we have with the animal Holocaust. And I expect that a lot of non-vegans, if they come across this video, they will say, well, humans is one thing, but animals is another thing. And I just want to remind you, that is exactly what the Nazis said about the Jewish people. They said humans is one thing, but Jews is another thing. Like Jews, we have to put in a completely different category. They're subhuman. That's what the Nazis would say. They would say, they don't count. They're not in the in-group. They're left out of the circle of consideration. You see how you're doing the same thing to animals as the Nazis did with the Jews, looking for arbitrary differences and then disqualifying that group based on those arbitrary differences. You as the oppressor get to choose. And so we often play this little name the trait game where you as the oppressor cycle through a bunch of traits where you think, well, maybe it's this one. Maybe I can disqualify them based on this one. It shouldn't be up to you because you're the oppressor and you have a vested interest, or you think you have a vested interest in maintaining this kind of discrimination. Because that's what it is. It's discrimination based on species in the animal Holocaust. Okay, I'll finish there. Thanks for listening. I hope this gets through to someone. I hope this is food for thought. I just wanted to share this idea here. Thanks. Bye.
Ja, tegen Holland hebben we niet gekend.
Nur gegen die Russen.
Gegen die Russen, ja.
Genauer gesagt haben wir nicht gegen die Russen gekämpft, sondern gegen den Bolschewismus.
Naja,
Der Russe ist ja
Mensch ist genau der gleiche wie wir.
stalinistischer Bolschewismus. und haben versucht, unser Land davor zu schützen und vor allen Dingen vielleicht ganz Europa. Wenn wir den Bolschewismus nicht aufgehalten hätten, dann wäre er auch über ihr Land gekommen und vielleicht nach Frankreich und so weiter.
Der war bis an der Kanalküste.
Ja, genau.
Der Russe. Hatte da alles vor.
Wir hatten, weil ja wir mussten auch gegen den Amerikaner kämpfen, weil der dann gelandet ist in Frankreich und in Italien und in Afrika und so weiter, haben wir am Schluss gegen den Russen gegen zum Teil 12-fache Übermacht gekämpft. Und immer mit der Hoffnung, ihn noch von den Reichsgrenzen fernzuhalten, zum Schutz unserer Bevölkerung. Er hat ja nicht die Genfer Konvention unterzeichnet und hat also vom Kriegsvölkerrecht musste er gar nicht Gebrauch machen, das hat er auch gezeigt. Und hat entsprechend unsere Bevölkerung aufgehetzt, natürlich durch die sowjetische Propaganda, die bolschewistische, massakriert und zum Teil ganz misshandelt. Hauptsächlich die Frauen. Und das haben wir versucht bis zuletzt zu verhindern. Das ist uns nicht gelungen, aber wir haben es
deutschen
versucht.
Soldaten nie passiert. Vielleicht, aber streng verboten. Das
Haben Deutsche nicht gemacht, meinen.
Deutsche
Nein.
nicht.
Nein, das
Wer
wird zwar immer
erwischt
behauptet,
wurde, der wurde
das
sofort
wird behauptet,
erschossen.
das hat die deutsche Wehrmacht nicht gemacht.
Das war nicht erlaubt. Also wer erwischt wurde, wurde sofort erschossen oder in eine Schafkompanie gesteckt.
Es hat doch auch Unangenehmheiten gegeben zwischen der
Viel
Wehrmacht und der
unangenehm.
Bevölkerung.
Selbstverständlich.
In Holland.
Welche denn?
In Holland?
Welche denn?
In Putten, mein Dorf, wo
Ja,
ich geboren bin,
was ist da passiert?
da hat die Wehrmacht das ganze Dorf umriegelt und die männliche Bevölkerung zum Arbeitseinsatz ins Reich deportiert. Und von den über 600 abgeführten Männern sind nur 49 zurückgekommen.
Haben Sie da Beweise?
Ja, die Männer sind nie wiedergekommen. Mein Großonkel waren dabei, die sind dabei umgekommen.
Und das hat die Wehrmacht gemacht? Das glaube ich nicht. Die
Das?
Wehrmacht hat mit diesen Arbeitseinsatz Leute
Doch, die
zu
Wehrmacht-
verhaften.
Die,
Das war vielleicht Polizeitruppe. Das war die Reaktion auf dieses Vorkommen, dass ein Fahrzeug vernichtet wurde durch Partisanen.
aber das allererste Verbrechen war doch, dass die Niederlande mit Krieg überrollt worden waren. Wir sind
Richtig.
nicht begonnen.
Ja, das ist richtig.
Liebe Frau,
Einmarschiert,
wir haben stundenlang diskutiert.
einmarschiert
Wir kommen nicht weiter.
ohne zu fragen, ob wir das dürfen. Ne?
Krieg
Ob das die
ist
Wehrmacht
ein
darf,
furchtbares
erst hätte fragen müssen, dürfen wir durch Holland durch.
Vielleicht Kriegserklärung abgeben.
Ja, da hätte aber niemand gesagt, ihr könnt das. Sag, im Krieg herrschen andere Gesetze.